Hello friends. If you searched Fable 5 versus Opus 8 this week, you are not alone. That confused search tells you everything about why Anthropic's newest model naming is so tricky. The model is not called Opus 8. It is Claude Fable 5, and it sits in a completely different tier from Opus altogether. Here is why this matters right now. On July 1st, 2026, just yesterday, Anthropic restored global access to Fable 5 after a 19-day suspension triggered by a US government export control order. So Fable 5 is back. Opus 4.8 is still here, and developers everywhere are asking the same question. Which one should I actually use, and what genuinely changed? Let's find out. First, we need a clear map of how Anthropic structures its model lineup. Alright, let's build the map. Since the Claude 3 generation in March 2024, Anthropic has organized its models into 3 named tiers. At the bottom, Haiku, fast and cheap. In the middle, Sonnet, balanced. At the top, Opus, the previous frontier, now represented by Claude Opus 4.8, released May 28, 2026. That was the lineup everyone knew. Then on June 9, 2026, Anthropic added something new, a 4th tier called Mythos-class, sitting above Opus entirely. Claude Fable 5 is the first publicly available model from that tier. It is not an Opus update. It is not Opus 5. It is a different class of model, the way a graduate degree sits above an undergraduate one, not just a harder version of the same thing. That is the key distinction the naming trips people up on. Now let's look at what that tier difference actually means in numbers. Now look at this. On SWE-bench Pro, a real-world software engineering test using actual GitHub issues, Fable 5 scores 80.3% against Opus 4, 8's 69.2%. That 11-point gap is larger than the gap between Opus 4.8 and Gemini 3.1 Pro. On FrontierCode Diamond, the hardest tier of coding tasks requiring sustained reasoning across a full codebase, Fable 5 scores 29.3% versus Opus 4, 8's 13.4%. That is more than double. On Artificial Analysis's Independent Intelligence Index, Fable 5 scores 65, above GPT 5.5 at 60. You can see exactly this kind of gap in the real world. Stripe used Fable 5 to complete a migration across a 50 million-line Ruby codebase in a single day, work that would have taken a full team over 2 months. The pattern is clear. The bigger and harder the task, the wider Fable 5's lead. But here is the interesting part. Fable 5 and Opus 4.8 are actually designed to work together, and that has everything to do with how Fable 5's safety system works. Here is the twist that makes Fable 5 unlike any previous Claude release. Every single query you send first passes through a set of safety classifiers built into the model. Those classifiers watch for 4 sensitive areas: offensive cybersecurity, biology and chemistry, model distillation, and general requests. If a query touches one of those flagged areas, the system quietly hands it to Claude Opus 4.8 instead, and you get a notification telling you that happened. If the query clears, Fable 5 handles it at full Mythos-class capability. Anthropic reports more than 95% of sessions never trigger the fallback at all. So the two models are not rivals, they are a designed pair. Fable 5 takes the frontier work, Opus 4.8 covers the sensitive edge cases, and you always get an answer. That architecture shapes the cost picture. Which is next? Now let's talk money. On the rate card, Fable 5 costs $10 per million input tokens and $50 per million output tokens. Opus 4.8 sits at exactly half that, $5 input and $25 output per million. Every single rate is a clean 2 times multiple. That sticker gap sounds steep, but here is what the rate card does not show. On complex, long horizon tasks, Fable 5 tends to finish in fewer turns and produce fewer wasted tokens, because it gets things right earlier in the process. If Opus 4.8 needs 2 correction passes to finish a job, the real cost of those 2 calls can push past a single Fable 5 call. There is also a billing detail worth knowing. Any query rerouted by the safety classifiers to Opus 4.8 is billed at Opus rates, not Fable rates. So for routine, high-volume work, Opus 4.8 wins on cost. For hard, long-running jobs, the gap is often much smaller than it first appears. Alright, let's land the plane. Here's the clearest mental model you can take away from this video. Start with Opus 4.8. It is fast, it is half the price, and it handles the large majority of everyday tasks: writing, analysis, code review, explanation, debugging. You do not need the Mythos tier for that. Reach for Fable 5 when the job is genuinely long horizon and high complexity. Multi-step migrations, full codebase refactors, deep autonomous research runs, work where Opus 4.8 has hit a ceiling, and the benchmark gap actually translates into better output. One important note: Fable 5 was suspended on June 12th under a US export control directive, and access was only restored globally on July 1st, 2026, just yesterday. Always verify current availability before you architect a product around it. That is the full picture. 2 models, 1 pair, a clear decision rule. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.